If you look at the top of the page, you will see a set of props and a set of themes. The dividing line that goes through that slide shows you the place where he stops and prays. And all of the parallels underneath are an exact match. Joseph Smith has constructed this document very, very, very carefully. This is not a retelling of a story. This is a very complex document. I don't think I have seen it all yet. These are things I have seen in the last 2 weeks. I have seen a few more things since. I am coming to the conclusion that this document needs to be studied a lot more. A lot more. The reason why it didn't become published is very interesting to me. In fact, the whole nature of the document, I have a theory which I will work on. But this document is so extremely interesting because it's so complex. Joseph Smith is trying to do something very deliberate, and I think that it calls for much further study. Here is another set of parallels. These are opposites. In this particular set, we learn what happens to Joseph Smith before and after. I'll just read off what it says. The world's in darkness, and then Joseph is surrounded by light. Joseph's mind was exceedingly distressed, but afterwards he's filled with love. Some people said there was no God, and Joseph saw him. When Joseph saw the Lord himself, mankind was not coming to the Lord, but the Lord was with Joseph afterward. Joseph felt grief before, but he felt joy after. Joseph had belief before, but afterward he could find none who would believe. As you can tell by now, this is an intricate text, and again, I would say that it calls for further study. This brings us to the most frequent anti-Mormon criticism about JS 1832, that God the Father is obviously not mentioned as making an appearance to Joseph Smith in this first vision account. I would like to suggest, however, that all this time, we as Latter-day Saints have not recognized that God the Father's appearance is, in fact, referred to right in this document. But all this time, we've been looking in the wrong place. In the introductory remarks of JS 1832, Joseph Smith outlined precisely how he was about to proceed in the narration of his history. He mentioned that in the very first incident associated with his marvelous experience in the Restoration, he received the testimony from on high. Because of the formatting of the introductory paragraph and the structure of the text which follows it, it can be concluded with a marked degree of certainty that this testimony was connected with the first vision. The question to ask then is, what was the testimony from on high? Joseph Smith answers this question in another one of his recitals, which is November of 1835. There he states that one of the two personages who appeared to him testified that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. In JS 1838, which is the first vision narrative now published in the Pearl of Great Price, we learn that one of the personages testified to Joseph Smith using the following words, "This is my beloved Son." We may comfortably conclude from this documentary evidence that the testimony from on high of JS 1832 is equivalent to the phrase spoken by God the Father in JS 1838. Therefore, we may safely say that when Joseph Smith wrote the 1832 account of the first vision, the appearance of God the Father was definitely in his mind because he obliquely refers to it. It seems that he did not make an explicit mention of this part of the story simply because of what I have shown you before. He had chosen to use the Apostle Paul's experience as the main framework for that portion of his narrative, and Paul only saw Jesus Christ. I would now like to offer some brief insights on a few other anti-Mormon arguments that are commonly used against the first vision, specifically those that are connected with accusations of revisionism. The first anti-Mormon claim that I would like to draw your attention to is what I call a real whopper. It says that Joseph Smith joined not just one church after God supposedly commanded him not to in 1820, thus demonstrating that his meeting with the Lord never really happened, but he joined 3 different churches before he formally organized the LDS faith in 1830. The basic problem with this particular argument is that there have been no authentic documents ever produced confirming that Joseph Smith actually became an acknowledged member of either the Baptist, the Methodist, or the Presbyterian denominations. Every one of the claims of joining other faiths is made extremely late in the historical record, but I have gathered together a few very early documents that say just the opposite. I'll just read through a few of them briefly. Here it is in November 1830. 4 LDS men from New York teach that at the time the angel appeared to Joseph Smith, which is September 1823, he made no pretensions to religion of any kind. 1831, this is February. The editor of the Palmyra, New York newspaper claims that he had been credibly informed and is quite certain that the prophet never made any serious pretensions to religion until the Book of Mormon. 1832, March. A couple of young Mormon men teach the citizens in the courthouse. Joseph Smith, who was then an inhabitant of the state of New York, town of Manchester, having repented of his sins, but not attached himself to any party of Christians, owing to the numerous divisions among them, and being in doubt what his duty was, he had recourse to prayer. By the way, that particular document has first vision elements in it before JS 1832 is created, and I don't have time to deal with that, but I want to make you aware of it. That happens to be a really good example of somebody who has gone ahead and revised. They have taken elements of the first vision story and elements of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon story. In that particular article, they melded them together, and they admitted how it happened too. They said that they were talking from memory, and they weren't quite sure. And so when you're dealing with the accusations of revisionism, you want to be very careful about understanding the documents that people are using to claim revisionism. Here is another one of the little irksome arguments that the prophet is having used against his first vision story. The argument goes that Joseph Smith initially said that his first vision visitants were angels, and they use this particular document as the evidence. Here you've got the diary, 14th of November, 1835. It says, "The time I received the first visitation of angels, which was I was about 14 years old." And people say, well, look, he's saying that his visitation was of angels when he was 14 years old. And they try and use that against Joseph Smith. But only 5 days previous, in his same diary, if people would just read the book, they would see that Joseph Smith is giving us a really interesting insight into his first vision experience. He says, when I was about 14 years old, I had a visitation of 2 personages, and I saw many angels. So when Joseph Smith says on 14th of November, my first visitation of angels was when I was 14 years old, he's not kidding. He saw many angels the first time in the sacred grove. Moroni is not the first angel that Joseph Smith sees. The next argument that I would like to deal with briefly has to do with the idea that Joseph Smith was making up the first vision story throughout the 1830s, and that's why nobody hears about it in public, either among members of the church or among the general populace. This particular slide argues pretty persuasively otherwise. In fact, if you look at the far left-hand side of the slide, you'll see that in approximately 1829, or somewhere before December of 1829, we have a possible statement, a statement by somebody, his name is Green. And what he says is that Joseph Smith was preaching in Victor, New York, that he had been met by God. And in fact, the title that this person uses is the Almighty. What he does is he is met by God, and his experience is like what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. So there we have a connection with this is a vision, a theophany. But most important, look there at the bottom. who says that he was converted to true doctrine. So this is an idea that's floating around in 1829. Now, I've got another instance that I am leaning heavily toward that has to do with 1829 and Joseph Smith talking about the first vision, but I haven't quite developed that enough to my satisfaction, so I'll leave that out for now. But you can see that all the way through that particular time period, this is all just 1830s. People who are anti-Mormons like to pick on Edward Stevenson. Oh, well, Edward Stevenson's memory, well, his reminiscence is so far gone in the very last part of the 19th century, so he's probably just misremembering. I saw that in a book just published recently by somebody who has been to this conference. But you have a second witness, and that is Joseph Curtis. He was there too.